I'm Ed Adams, and this is the weekly Genealogy Toolkit, the podcast that helps the new genealogist get the most out of their research time and avoid the most common pitfalls. I remember the fall of the Soviet Union almost like it was yesterday. I remember sitting in front of the TV, looking up at my dad, who was standing in the living room with his mouth hanging wide open, as they brought down the hammer and sickle over the Kremlin for the last time. I vaguely remember the reappearance of the Baltic states, but after the collapse of the USSR, I have vivid memories of all the maps being wrong. I remember wondering where Belarus and Ukraine had come from. Not long after that was the implosion of Yugoslavia and the emergence of the new Balkan states, and that threw all the school maps into disarray again. Most of all, I remember the end of Czechoslovakia. I remember wondering if things were ever going to settle down again. It seemed like every national border was up for renegotiation. Historic beefs that I was completely unaware of resurfaced, and the early to mid-90s just felt like a pretty turbulent time. If only we knew what was in store for us later. But that's for another episode, perhaps. This week, let's talk about borders in genealogy. How many times have you moved in your life? I've unfortunately moved, I think, 18 times, so I feel very bad for anyone 100 years from now who tries to piece together all the details of my life from documentary evidence. I have a common name, and I've lived just about everywhere. Thankfully, most of my ancestors have been much more sedentary, only taking 1 or 2 moves in a lifetime. There are a few, though, that appear to have moved several times, but never very far. I remember looking into one of my many lines that ended up along the Savannah River. One gentleman I was researching was born in Washington District, South Carolina. Later, he shows up on censuses in Pendleton District, but then he dies in Anderson County. I spent time trying to confirm that this was the same person because he had a fairly common name too, and any time that you look at someone who's mobile that long ago, it's really easy to misattribute. After some time, I finally realized that he never moved at all. Those 3 areas cover much of the same physical space. So he never really moved. The borders moved around him. I had a similar but slightly different challenge with my wife's family of Ukrainians. My wife's great-grandmother couldn't seem to keep her nationality straight. On her 1921 passenger manifest, she said that she was born in Poland. In the 1925 New York State Census, she said she was born in Austria. In the 1930 federal census, she's again from Poland, but says she speaks Russian. In the 1940 census, she's from Russia, and finally in the 1950 census, it again says she's from Austria. So where the heck was she from? Did she move around a lot? Or did the things around her move? Thankfully, her birthplace was listed on the passenger manifest. It was written as Jadwiga, Poland. A quick search on the internet told me that there is no such place. It was likely a place named for Jadwiga, the Queen of Poland in the 1380s and 90s, but that didn't really help me much. I found her marriage certificate, which was witnessed by her brother, so I found her brother's passenger manifest where he indicated that he was from Austria, but that he was ethnically Ruthenian. Ruthenian is a name that can sometimes refer to just about any Eastern Slavic people, but at the time that he immigrated in the United States, it was mostly used for people who today call themselves Ukrainian. This reminded me of the 1930 federal census, which indicated that my wife's great-grandmother spoke Russian. So likely she didn't speak Russian, but rather spoke Ukrainian, and while Ruthenian was a valid language in the enumeration instructions for the 1930 census, Ruthenian hasn't always been recognized as an independent language, so I could easily see why it was listed that way. Double-checking with her brother, he did report his native tongue as Ruthenian, so I felt like I was onto something. After reading a bit of history of Ukraine, I knew that I was looking for a place that had at one point been a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, at one point was part of Poland, and by 1940 was part of Russia or the Soviet Union. So there's a few ways to do this. You can go to places like the Library of Congress or David Rumsey Maps and just start looking at maps of the area from different time periods. Rumsey Maps has a really good tool that places period maps on a Google Maps style interface and allows you to stack multiple maps across the periods and then fiddle with their transparency so you can look at multiple maps at the same time. Or you can just press the easy button and go to cronus.org. I'll put a link in the description. Cronus is a great project. It gets some criticism because it's not perfect, and it isn't perfect, but it's pretty darn good. I think of it as a Google Maps, but you can change the year to any year from 2000 BC to 2000 AD. Using this tool, I could quickly narrow down the part of Ukraine that she was from to a very manageable area. She was from somewhere within an area bordered by Kamieniec-Podilsky, Przemysl, Czerwonograd, and Sparaj. From there, I could hop over to the real Google Maps. I zoomed into this particular area and switched my keyboard over from English to Ukrainian. I typed in a decent phonetic attempt at her hometown name of Yatvyegi, and boom, I immediately had two great candidates, one southwest of Lvov and one to the southeast. I eventually was able to narrow this down, and that's probably a conversation for another time, but one of the key pieces of evidence was taking all of the seemingly conflicting information about her birthplace and looking at it instead over time. This allowed me to really narrow things down. But what about that first example of the guy who always seems to be in a different county even though he's always in the same place? Cronus.org is not the right tool for figuring this out. Cronus has a lot of information that goes beyond the shifting borders, and you can spend a lot of time just playing around with it, but it doesn't show administrative boundaries below the national level. To get a good understanding of the development and evolution of county boundaries in the United States, the best place to go right now is the Newberry Library's Atlas of Historical County Boundaries. Again, link will be in the description. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with this resource. It's been around for quite some time, and they changed the front-end software for displaying the information several years ago. Their earlier front end was not all that attractive, but I felt like it was more usable than their current software. It looks nice. If you've ever used Google Maps, you'll know right away how to use their software, but it just lacks some of the features that the original had that made it a little more useful. So if you happen to work for the Newberry Library, please, I'm begging. My main frustration comes from the fact that it doesn't display the county names unless you hover your mouse over a specific county. It would be much more useful if county names were displayed over the polygon depicting the county all the time. Additionally, at various times and in various locations, you may be dealing with states that had multiple administrative structures of the roughly county level. Namely, there are states that had counties, parishes, and districts all simultaneously. The old software allowed you to display those separately or with different colors to help differentiate them. The current system is just a mess when you find yourself in one of those situations. There, I had to get that off my chest. But even with all my frustrations, I still use this resource all the time. And if you're a computer-savvy type, you can also download shapefiles or KMZs to use in your favorite GIS or Google Earth. Understanding the evolution of national and subnational borders can help you do a lot more than simply pinpoint where someone was from. It can help you get a better idea of where to look for sources to continue your research. As counties evolved in the United States, it was common for a single larger county to be split into multiple smaller counties as populations increased over time. Sometimes, the records from the original county would be dispersed to the various new county seats. But oftentimes, the older records were maintained in whichever county maintained the original county seat, and the newer records would be recorded in each respective county. So, if you're doing research within a county that covers a time period before that county existed, look and see what county it was divided from, and perhaps you'll find more within that county. You see similar things with changing national borders. I think I've probably mentioned before, but when looking into the particular area within Ukraine that my wife's family is from, and the time period in which her grandmother lived, I have to go digging in Ukrainian, Polish, and Austrian record archives. When the Soviet Union dissolved, and the many old states of Eastern Europe re-emerged, my teachers lamented having to order new globes and maps every few months, it seemed. Thankfully, with tools like Cronus and the Atlas of Historical County Boundaries, you can easily browse through all of those changes in a few minutes. I'd encourage you to go play around with these tools even if you don't have any cases with wandering borders. It's just fun to see things change over time. And if I were a betting man, I'd wager at some point you're going to need those tools. Have you ever seen a case where it looked like an ancestor moved a lot and couldn't keep their birthplace straight, only to realize that it was because of shifting borders? I'd love to hear about it. Tell me on Twitter @TheWGTPod. If anything you heard today sparked an interest, please leave a review. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Next week, we'll look into some great search tips that can really help find those records that just don't seem to come up. The truth of the matter is that many of the back-end search functions of our favorite genealogy sites work more like the early internet search engines like AltaVista or Lycos than like Google. So we're going to dust off some of those old internet search skills and show you how they can help you find those really stubborn ancestors. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you then.